Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Arell, and I'm pretty excited about this video. I'm not sure exactly why, but it is about the words we use, and maybe it'll be a part of a series because I think words are really, really important. So I'm going to surprise you because the words I'm thinking about today are words like should, need, making, and I'll tell you in a second what that means, and then pronouns. So when we say I or you or they, and I have specific lessons related to each word. Number one, making or make or made. When we say something like he made me, they made me, you're making me, and then et cetera, we're immediately offering over our own agency to someone else and making them responsible for our feelings. I'm not so into that. You're making me so mad. I'm not sure. You're making me so sad. He made me so pissed. I don't like it. Immediately when someone else is the thing that caused you to have a certain feeling, which you articulate by using the word make or made or making, there's a kind of handing over of your own responsibility, your own strength, and your own power by saying that they made you. Personally, I have an opinion that no one can make you actually feel anything, but that is your feelings and your emotional experience or your affect actually derive from a whole history of things that have happened to you in the past. So that if someone's late for a meeting and you feel angry, your experience is anger, it probably has to do with the fact that there's some loss that you have experienced in relationship to this person being late, or you have some backstory of why being late annoys you that have nothing to do with that person. So they actually didn't make you feel anything. You actually have a feeling of anger based on the value of people being on time, based on a whole story that you could tell about histories of people being late and what that caused for you in your life. But again, it's not really related to what the person's doing. I think it's really important to think about this in relationship to our personal lives and our intimate relationships with other people, right? Because if we're in a relationship with somebody and we experience them as causing us certain emotional qualities, now they may be at fault, but they're not actually causing the feeling. There's things that are happening internally to us that the feeling is emerging, and that gives us some information. So maybe if you find yourself angry or sad around somebody all the time, that person's not the greatest person to have in your life. But I also think by saying that it's their responsibility, it actually shuts you off from looking at what you're bringing to the table, right? So what is the thing that's causing your anger or sadness really? It's not necessarily that person, but what that person's doing that's enacting in you. Next word, group of words, should or need. Now, I said this already in another video, don't should on yourself. This is a particular hot point for me because when I hear someone say, you need to, you should, you must, you have to. Well, at this age now, I can kind of allow for flexibility with others. But when I hear it, I immediately have a kind of rigidity in my body because really it's saying that they have more information than I do about how to take care of myself. And I actually don't believe that. Now, they may have some good opinions. So for others who, especially those who find themselves in caretaking positions, or maybe some of you are mentors to younger people, think about when you say you need to call your doctor. You need to make sure to exercise every day, or you shouldn't call this person because it's bad for you. What are ways that we can offer advice that don't allow those words or that it disrupt our use of those words? So let's go to the doctor example. If you call the doctor may be able to help you with the right medicine for this illness. Immediately, that is not saying I have more information than you, but rather think about it this way. And it allows you or the person who's hearing these words to come up with some behavioral techniques that might really be helpful, or it actually puts the choice and power into that person's hands instead of saying you need, as if I'm the authority of your life. The exercise or the taking care of one's bodies or how someone eats. So you shouldn't eat red meat, or you need to exercise every day. Again, this is almost has a shaming quality to it. Instead, if you're say you're a person giving the advice to someone, I heard that eating red meat can really increase your iron levels, which, by the way, there's a lot of different ways to increase your iron levels than eating red meat, but let's go with red meat. Well, maybe let's use lentils. Okay, so you need to eat lentils to increase your iron levels because you're anemic. All right, how about if you eat more lentils, your iron levels will increase? It puts the onus in the power of the person whose body will benefit from eating the lentils, instead of being a kind of order or even a controlling message from someone else about what that person should or shouldn't do. Okay, so the others have to do with, and I'm going to put them in two different categories. So one category is the I/you category, and the other category is the they category. Completely different situations. Whenever I was learning this in relationship to psychology, one of the lessons I heard was to put everything in I statements. And I really think it's worth thinking deeply about in relationship to both what was also called fair fighting, but then also in relationship to our articulating our experiences of wounding in the world. And so I'll explain both of these. So number one, when we think about fair fighting, if you're in an argument with somebody who really has hurt your feelings, didn't show up for you, didn't call, and the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, you hurt me, you didn't call me back, you wrecked my afternoon. All of those statements are aggressive, maybe rightly so, but aggressive and accusatory and ultimately not really helpful. If the framing is, I waited all afternoon for your call and I lost my day thinking that you were gonna call, so I'm sad and I'm also angry that I lost that time. That phrasing is responsible, a lot less accusatory, and helps the person understand what the cost was for their not returning the call. Or another way of articulating it, I'm so sad I didn't hear from you because I was really looking forward to spending the day with you. Again, it gives value to what was lost, right? The time you spent with somebody or the time you lost. Instead of just accusing someone of doing something wrong. So, I even do this in my relationship with starting with you, but I try to catch myself as much as I can, because that statement is just a little bit of an attack rather than a statement that gives information to somebody so that the behavior can be understood and then potentially changed. If the behavior doesn't change and there's a continual experience of that loss, then there's another issue. But in terms of when you're angry at somebody or you're fighting with somebody, friends, relationships, parents, if you can put things in I statements, it helps them understand better your experience and allows, in my opinion, greater opportunity for there to be a kind of resolution after the argument or the intense feelings. The other time I hear this I-you dynamic is in my classroom, and specifically related to when we're talking about trauma or painful situations. I also hear it in my work with individuals in groups when I'm going a little deeper into the psychology of those who've experienced trauma or traumatic circumstances, or those who deal with things that are traumatic in terms of their secondary engagement, meaning that they weren't traumatized, but that they have a situation where they might be helping somebody who was. So like for a chaplain, for instance. So what happens is, as the experience gets to be more emotionally volatile or more effective, so causes people to have a higher level of emotion, they'll start to flip the use of I. So I felt sad, or I was disturbed, or I was so scared, and they'll say you. And they'll start to say, you know when you feel scared about, or when you have someone die in your family and you feel such a sense of loss. They'll start to describe the whole experience in using you and using that second person language. And so what that does in the dynamic is it doesn't allow for a claiming of the emotional experience or acknowledging the internal acknowledgement of the emotional experience. It keeps that experience slightly distanced, almost like it's dissociated in a way. It's a protective measure, so sometimes it's useful. So if I'm going to correct it, say in a classroom, I'm very careful about the correction. I'm not usually dealing with a high level of emotion when that happens. But I do like to point it out because it's so much more powerful to say the I in terms of one's emotional processing, or in terms of one's usage of voice. And students do this a lot in papers. So you know when, you, and then et cetera, et cetera. But by claiming the I felt scared when, or I was intimidated by, instead of giving me an example as if when, that distancing technique, it's not that useful for your own personal growth. So the third usage of pronouns, I think most of my audience probably recognizes the power of pronouns when we're thinking especially about gender, sex, and sexuality. It matters what pronouns we use, and it's meaningful. So thinking about when we use pronouns as a way to create distance or as a way to create amorphous groups, which is where I'm going next, is important, both in our speaking and in our writing. So this last thing that I'll mention related to that has to do with the use of the word they. It's happened a lot recently as people have talked to me more in depth about their experiences around the conflict that the world is witnessing, and the amount of deaths the world is witnessing related to Israel and Palestine. I have talked to people on both sides who have deep feelings about the whole dynamic, and the use of the word they is so popular. They did this, or they told me this, or they're afraid of. And what happens when the they is used is that there's the creation of an amorphous group that lacks an identity, which disenables us from getting to the real complexity, not only of the history or the issue at hand, which is less than my focus professionally, but also of the complexity related to our emotions and our investments as Americans, as immigrants, as Europeans, as people in the world, in terms of our religion, as Muslims, as Christians, as Jews. There's such complexity around our response to this conflict. And when we say they in reference to any of these groups, there's a kind of a blocking of the groups instead of a recognition of the amount of nuance of people that are participating, that need to be recognized, that have to be delineated in order to understand the complexity. So, and I'm using this example, it's a volatile example, but I think perhaps it'll help you imagine and think about when you say they, who is the they? So there's one aspect of the usage of they that's about identifying or offering an identity back as we're talking about these groups instead of being amorphous. It's also really important when you think about politics, because the rhetoricians in the news or the media, when we start to use they, it just creates factions that may not exist. Like, who is the they? Is it, Republicans in the Senate, or is it a Democratic Party leader and her or his groups in Georgia? I mean, knowing who the they is important. So using they can be manipulative, and it also can disallow us when we use it in our own lives to describe our experiences. They didn't respond right to my question. Well, who is the they? And that answering that question and being more specific with the noun gives us some information about our experiences and allows us to get a little deeper into the nuance of any given experience, and also keeps us from creating these amorphous groups that don't necessarily exist, because we're all different. Maybe we have some similarities, but there are differences in the groups, right? So it's important that the they have some life to it, some nuance, and using nouns is always a little bit more powerful. It can also be scarier. So as you think about this, you might think of some of your own examples that create some demand of your thinking, demand of your emotional availability in a different and new way. But I do think it's worth starting to think about how we use pronouns in our language that creates distance, emotional, psychological, and also that are mobilized for political means or in the use of harming others.